Hello, everybody. I'm Margie Cates, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Michelle Kumata to you. I've known Michelle since she was 4 years old, and even then, I marveled at her art abilities. She really is incredible. Today, Michelle will share with us the exploration that she has conducted of her mother's family, who settled in Brazil. And so through her art, she will tell the story today. Michelle gained acclaim as a graphic artist at the Seattle Times, over a decade's worth of publications. She also served as exhibit director at the Wing-Luke Museum for 12 years, where she worked with Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders to amplify their stories through engaging exhibitions. Her work has been exhibited at ArtX Contemporary, Bainbridge Island Museum of Art, Seattle Japanese Garden, the Society of Illustrators Museum in New York City, Seattle Convention Center, Meta, City of Seattle, Asian Counseling and Referral Services, the Bellevue Art Museum, and the Library of Congress. So it is a thrill for me to be able to introduce Michelle to you. We're in for a real treat today.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really want to thank Margie for inviting me to come speak to you. Margie and my mom taught together for many years. I've known her, like she said, since I was little. Oh, can you hear me now? Okay, sorry about that.
You can also turn that if you need to.
Oh, turn it.
Yeah, if you need to, yeah, closer to your mouth.
Okay. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you. So Margie and my mom taught together for many years. So as she mentioned, I've known her since I was a child. And I wanted to thank Margie and Horizon House for having me here. And for all of you to come take your time out of your day to listen to me. And also wanted to thank my parents, my step-parents, my family for all their support and encouragement. My mom, Saki, is here in the back row, and my husband, Ken, is sitting next to her, and then we have some other cousins that are visiting. And I think we may have some other relatives that were born in Brazil that will be here, hopefully, if they can find their way here. Let's see. So for my talk, I'm going to share about my background, my journey, and how this Japanese-Brazilian project came about. Also, my process collecting stories and creating art for this project. And I really hope to encourage you all to share and preserve your own stories and photos with your families. So I just wanted to give a quick land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that I am on the unceded land of the Duwamish people, the first people of Seattle, and express my gratitude to the land itself and to the Duwamish tribe, past, present, and future. So the whole purpose of this project is to bring to light the history of Japanese Brazilians through stories and artwork, and also inspire and empower others to collect and preserve their own family histories. So I'll share a little bit about my background growing up in Seattle, and the experiences and influences that shape my artwork and voice. I'm Japanese American, born and raised in Seattle. My mother is Nisei, or second generation, and my dad is Sansei, third generation. That's me at 1 year old, and then me at my preschool graduation with my mouth open. This is a painting that's a self-portrait. It's called Short Grain, Long Grain, and it references two different kinds of rice, which symbolize my Japanese and American identity. I attended Seattle Public Schools until 10th grade, when I had the opportunity to attend a local private school. I had a really a hard time adjusting as I went from a very diverse junior high to a small, affluent private school. And so this time prompted me to explore my own identity. I started playing taiko, which is Japanese drums, and I loved taiko because it was loud and unapologetic, and it broke stereotypes of Japanese Americans as being passive and quiet. I got involved with the International Examiner, which is a local Asian Pacific American newspaper. Ron Chu, who Margie mentioned, spoke here recently. He's the one that wrote My Unforgotten Seattle. He was my mentor, and he was the editor at the International Examiner. This is one of the first illustrations I produced of Vincent Chin, who was a Chinese American living in Detroit, who was beaten to death by laid-off auto workers who targeted him as a Japanese national. He was Chinese American, and they thought he was a Japanese national. And this was in the early 80s. So through the International Examiner, I learned about our Asian Pacific American history, and I got more involved in the community, feeling more sense of belonging, support, and pride. This is another self-portrait. I went to New York and studied illustration at the School of Visual Arts. And this is created in pen and ink. There's references to Japanese culture and heritage. You'll see the round Daruma doll on the building behind my shoulder. So the significance of the Daruma is that you get this doll and it has blank eyes. You paint in one eye when you set a goal, then you paint the other eye when you achieve your goal. So I had always wanted to study art in New York. And so even though I was living in a tiny dorm room in Manhattan, I felt like I had achieved something important to me. But living in New York also made me appreciate and miss Seattle. And after earning my BFA, I returned home. So back in Seattle, Ron Chu had recently been hired as the executive director of the Wing Luke Museum, and Ron reached out to see if I would be interested in working on an exhibit about the local Japanese American community. And this was in 1991 when I first started working there. Ron was developing the Wing's community-based exhibition model, where the Wing staff would work collaboratively with community members to develop exhibitions. And this exhibit centered Japanese American voices and stories. These images show the development of Executive Order 9066, 50 years before and 50 years after, which anchors the history of local Japanese American community with the World War II incarceration. This is Executive Order 9066. On December 7th, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. And then President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066 on February 19th, 1942, which authorized the forced removal and incarceration of over 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry from the west coast of the U.S. Japanese Americans were viewed as a threat to national security, though no person of Japanese ancestry living in the U.S. was ever convicted of espionage or sabotage during World War II. The forced removal and incarceration was fueled by racism and wartime hysteria. This is a list of terminology from Densho, which is a local organization that shares the stories of the Japanese American incarceration. The U.S. government used misleading terms related to the incarceration. Japanese Americans were later transferred to longer-term camps, which the government called relocation centers. And despite the seemingly innocuous name, these were prisons, compounds of barracks surrounded by barbed wire fences and patrolled by armed guards, which Japanese Americans could not leave without permission. As prison camps outside the normal criminal justice system, designed to confine civilians for military and political purposes on the basis of race and ethnicity, these sites also fit the description or definition of concentration camps. So I sometimes use the term American concentration camp. This is my dad at Minidoka, an American concentration camp, which was located in Jerome, Idaho. This is one of the few family photos from camp. My dad's parents were born in Seattle. They married before the incarceration. My dad was born in camp, and then his family moved to Cleveland, Ohio after the war. The U.S. government encouraged Japanese Americans to move away from the West Coast because they were perceived as a threat. So this exhibit project was very personal for me. My family had not talked about the war or the incarceration, though both my parents were born during World War II, while their parents were held in the Minidoka concentration camp in Idaho. Although I'm a descendant of incarcerees, I don't know much about our family's experience. Both of my parents were born in Minidoka, so they don't have memories from camp. My grandparents had not shared much about their experience living at Minidoka. They never expressed anger or resentment about being forcibly removed from Seattle and incarcerated. Maybe that was a way of coping, a way of survival. Maybe they didn't feel they had a voice. My aunt, Tomo Matsumoto, shared this photo of her kindergarten class at Minidoka. She's seated front row, second from the right. And I shared this image on Instagram a couple years ago, and other folks recognized their family members in the photo. The photo's made more poignant by the large folds cutting through the image. This is during the installation of the 9066 exhibit. This was a huge community-driven effort. There were over 100 local Japanese Americans contributing to this project, and most were former incarcerees. They shared their stories, photos, artifacts, skill, and support, and they helped create a powerful, authentic first-person perspective. This is an image of the barrack recreation showing the living quarters for the incarcerees. This was a very powerful way to let visitors experience this history. The barrack was designed and built by Bob Shimabukuro, who is a local activist, writer, and woodworker, and Paul Aberano, a Nisei carpenter. This is from the opening reception. So working on the exhibit helped me learn more about Japanese American history and firsthand from the people who lived it. The project gave the Japanese American community visibility and validation. People shared stories they had been holding in for decades. It was cathartic and empowering for the Japanese American community. Excuse me. So in the mid-90s, I started working as a staff artist at the Seattle Times. This was my dream, to have a full-time creative job. So I had the opportunity to collaborate with a talented staff of writers, editors, photographers, and other artists. And then this is a piece called Becoming Mama, a collaboration with writer Paula Bach about her experience as a new mother. So I was really lucky. I got to create illustrations in different media, digital, painting, and three-dimensional works. And this assignment was to highlight a performance by a Japanese taiko group, and it was one of my favorites. I used brush and ink to evoke Japanese calligraphy. I also discovered the power of representation through art. Many friends and relatives were supportive of my work at the Seattle Times and said it was great to see diverse people in the newspaper and to see themselves represented. I learned the power and influence that artists have. And then I was working at the Times for over a decade. And then in 2006, the opportunity came up to return to the wing and help develop their new space in the historic East Gonyuk building. So I was excited to return to the International District and work with community again. The wing had a capital campaign. They raised funds to renovate this historic building, which was built by Chinese settlers. So it was really an honor and a humbling experience to develop exhibits with community members. Many of the exhibits brought together folks of different backgrounds and generations to share stories and collaborate. Here are some of the Korean American advisors meeting together to create an exhibit about the local Korean American community. This is a combination of images from the exhibit Bojagi, Unwrapping Korean American Identities. And a bojagi is a patchwork textile. It's pieced together from various shapes and colors. And so, like the bojagi quilt, this exhibit brought together many diverse and complex aspects of Korean American history, community, and identities. This is a cropped image from a panoramic photo of the Hiroshima Kenjinkai. And Kenjinkai is a prefectural organization. And this is a 4th of July picnic in Chico, Washington, which is near Bremerton. It features my great-grandpa, Kikujiro Kumata, his wife, Sono, and his son, who is my dad's father and my grandfather, Isamu Sam Kumata. Yeah. And he's holding an American flag. This was in 1922, so it was 20 years before Executive Order 9066. So for 12 years, I've been helping communities tell their stories, and then I decided to leave the museum to explore my own voice and stories through art. I took painting classes at the Miller School of Art, and my instructor, Mark Takamichi Miller, he's an amazing fountain of knowledge for art and painting, and he runs a very welcoming and supportive studio. I would go to the studio as much as I could because when I was painting, I felt like I had returned home. Some of the early works I created included these 3 paintings, which illuminate traditional Japanese fairy tales, memories of magic and wonder from my childhood. I love playing with textures, color, and composition, and I would get immersed in these imaginary worlds. So I really liked doing the fairy tale paintings, but then I thought it would be more interesting to explore real-life stories, and not only Japanese stories, but stories about Nikkei, people of Japanese descent who live outside of Japan. So in other words, the Japanese diaspora. Because I had a number of photos and family stories, I decided to focus on exploring my maternal family. So this is a photo of my grandparents and some of their children, maybe late 1920s or 30s, I'm not sure. I didn't have the foresight to ask my grandparents about their lives. My maternal grandparents mainly spoke Japanese, and I had limited Japanese language skills, so our communication was very minimal. My grandfather, Kametaro, was a respected fisherman in the Seattle area. He was known as the fishing god. He won numerous fishing derbies, and I remember elaborate meals he would cook with steamed crab, salmon, and satsumage, which is fried fish cake. He also made the best apple pie. My grandfather had immigrated from Kajika, Japan to Seattle in the mid-teens. He returned to his hometown and married my grandmother, Kinue. So this picture is of my grandmother Kinue with her mother Saki in Japan. And this is possibly right before Grandma and Grandpa married and left for the U.S. In 1918, my grandmother Kinue immigrated to Seattle. She was 18 years old and made the journey on a ship and was detained for a time at the Immigration and Naturalization Service building near Seattle's Chinatown International District. She didn't speak any English. So when I look at this picture, I try to imagine what my grandparents' lives were like. What would it be like to get married as a teenager and move away from my family to a foreign country? This is my grandparents' 50th anniversary in 1968. Grandpa was a living legend as a prize fisherman, so his story was well known. Grandma was quiet, humble, and extremely thrifty and resourceful. She used leftover cooked rice grains to seal envelopes, and she would darn holey socks with so many stitches and knots that it was like walking on tiny, painful pebbles. Grandma would let me paint with leftover beet juice. She'd also sneak treats to me when my mom and I would leave my cousin's house. Crumpled paper bags with half-eaten boxes of cereal, cookies, and an envelope of coins. So I'm sure my aunt and cousins wondered why their breakfasts and snacks kept disappearing. I always thought of my obachan, my grandma, as just a sweet old lady, but I didn't know her story, and I didn't realize what an important role she served in maintaining our family ties to Brazil until more recently. This is a portrait I did of my grandparents' family from the late 1940s. It's called Resilience, and the water represents the immigration of my grandparents from Japan to Seattle and the challenges their family endured and overcame in the U.S. So I developed this idea to go to Brazil after attending a workshop for artists who wanted to travel abroad. I'd been to Brazil a couple times before, but I didn't know the details of our family history, and it didn't dawn on me to ask how our family ended up in Brazil. This is a photo of great-grandma Saki with some of her grandchildren. I contacted Ricardo Haraguchi, who is a Japanese-Brazilian relative who currently lives in Florida, to help me with this effort. Ricardo has been the Takatsu family historian, and he helped me coordinate homestays and interviews and provided guidance on our family tree. And so this is Ricardo with his wife Jackie and daughter Nicole. So Ricardo shared how my grandma Kinue had left an impression on him. She was the force that maintained a link between our U.S. and Brazilian families. Grandma traveled to Brazil numerous times and brought all of her children to meet her family. My grandparents also sponsored Toyoaki Takatsu, one of our relatives, to live and attend college in Seattle. So pictured is Grandma with Toyoaki and his wife Toshiko at their wedding. And Toyoaki, who is 89 years old, will actually be visiting Seattle from New York in a week. Ricardo shared that he wanted to carry on Kinue's legacy and has served as a link between our U.S. and Brazil families, tracking the family tree, connecting and hosting relatives. So you can see my great-grandparents, Tomematsu and Saki, and then their children in this family tree created by Ricardo. Grandma Kinue is circled on the bottom row. So I was interested in finding out more about my grandma's siblings. So I'm going to give a little bit of historical background, timeline. Brazil received more African slaves than any other country in the world. An estimated 4.9 million slaves from Africa were brought to Brazil during the period from 1501 to 1866. Dutch, Portuguese, British, African, and Brazilians dominated the slave trade. The main crops they harvested were sugarcane, cotton, coffee, and tobacco. In the late 19th century, slavery was abolished in Brazil. And then Brazil recruited European laborers who eventually would leave because of the poor working conditions. So then Brazil looked to Asia to fill the labor gap. So from 1908 to 1941, 185,000 Japanese immigrated to Brazil. In the early 20th century, Japan's rural areas were impoverished. The Japanese government encouraged immigration, mainly to the U.S., but then in 1924, the U.S. Immigration Exclusion Act halted Japanese and other Asian immigration. So many Japanese went to Brazil for work and had better opportunities. Brazil has the highest population of Japanese outside of Japan. I was checking the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who reported that in 2023, there are approximately 2 million Japanese descendants living in Brazil. So our family left their hometown of Kajika and traveled by boat for a 2 to 3 week journey from Japan. They arrived in the port of Santos near Sao Paulo. Then they went inland to the countryside in Parada Barreto and a nearby town, Bela Floresta, to work as farm laborers. Today, the majority of our relatives live in Sao Paulo and some in Rio. I planned a 2-week stay in Brazil. So my first night in Sao Paulo, I stayed at the home of our relatives, Yayoi Takatsu Ikizumi. She shared a stack of old family photos, and at left you can see Yayoi with one of her brothers, Sunao. Yayoi told me that I would be sleeping in the same bed my grandma slept in when she visited Brazil 50 years before. So this was a really special moment and a very poignant moment to start my visit. So here are some of my Brazilian family that we met during a 2-week stay. We were welcomed with such grace and kindness. My husband, Ken, would stare at our family members, stunned to see Asian people speaking Portuguese. I will always appreciate their warmth, hospitality, and humor, and their openness to share family stories. Even though we come from different cultures, there was an undeniable familiarity and connection. So these are some photos from the interviews. So I used my skills and experience from the wing as I work with my family. Staying with the families was the best way to get to know them, learn about culture, food, language, and identity. Most elders only speak Portuguese and sometimes a little Japanese. So during interviews, I asked younger relatives to help with the English translation. That was a way to connect the generations. And then the younger people learned about their family stories because they were interpreting, translating, and then repeating the stories in English. There were so many amazing photos. I documented hundreds of photos, and it was sometimes overwhelming. So I would take notes as we looked through the photos, and then I shared the photos with relatives online to collect additional information. Circled is Hisaburo and Yoshi Takatsu and their family. Hisaburo is the eldest of the Takatsu siblings. This is Hisaburo, far right, in front of his Hotel Asahi in Bela Floresta. The hotel was the largest space in town, so it became a popular place for weddings and celebrations. So I really urge you to make sure you digitize all your old photos. You can even use your cell phone to photograph them or scan them, and then write down any information you can. Identify the individuals, the dates, the locations, what's happening in the photo, any related memories or stories, and write it all down so you can share it with your family. This is the Museum of Japanese Immigration, which was a really great resource for my project. It's located in Liberdade, which is São Paulo's Japantown. They have displays with trilingual text, so it's in Portuguese, Japanese, and English, and it provides a comprehensive Japanese-Brazilian history through art, photos, artifacts, and immersive spaces. And then I mentioned before the Kenjinkai, so our family's from Mie Kenjinkai, and it's they have prefectural organizations in Sao Paulo, which were originally organized to help support newly arrived immigrants and assist folks with financial support, help them find jobs, housing, and provide social connections. So the Mia Kenjinkai in Sao Paulo had a book that listed all their immigrant members, where they came from, what boat they came on, and when, and who they traveled with. So this was a way for me to find out some more information on my family. So food is another way to learn about Brazil's diverse cultures. And this is a potluck plate from our family reunion in the countryside. So it shows the blending of Brazilian, Japanese cultures, rice and beans, barbecue pork. There was this really great kale and sushi. Sunamono is pickled cucumber, and harusame is rice noodle salad. And then another cross-cultural example is this taiko group. They incorporate Japanese drumming and forró music, which originated on the farms of the northeastern Brazil, where farmers would sing as they gathered crops and others would join in. Forró is thought to have derived from the expression for all. So I'm gonna see if I can play. Yeah. Sorry. Having trouble. There. So for me, it was really exciting to see these Nikkei drummers transform a traditional art form to reflect their unique identities. So you could hear the flute and kind of different rhythms from traditional taiko music. And then I also discovered that several family members play taiko, including a retired school teacher and a couple with their very young son. And then this was the first painting I created after my trip. And this is a portrait of my great-grandmother, Saki Takatsu, who is the namesake of my mother. She was born in Kajika, Japan, and she and her husband had 8 children. My grandmother, Kinue, immigrated to the U.S. in 1918. And then Saki and her family were planning to immigrate to the U.S. in the 1920s, but the Immigration Exclusion Act of 1924 halted their immigration. So then in January 1927, Saki immigrated to Brazil on the Santos Maru ship with several of her adult children and grandchildren, and they were moving to a new country, sight unseen, for better opportunities. And this is a detail of the painting. So Saki's 6 children who immigrated to Brazil are illustrated as the flowers of the crown of thorns plant, representing the beauty, pain, strength, and resilience of their experience. Saki's 2 other children are represented by the flowers Saki wears in her kimono. Mosaburo, her son that stayed in Japan, represented by a camellia, and Kinue, who went to Seattle, is represented by a dahlia. Saki's husband, Tometaro, passed away in Japan. So I imagine Saki, who was in her mid-50s, a widow, journeying on a long boat trip, leaving her hometown and home country, not knowing the language or culture, and perhaps not knowing they wouldn't return to Japan. This painting is called Falling or Keida, and this references Japanese migration to Brazil. And so you can see a multi-generational family falling blindly, jumping into the unknown with a jungle of tangled vines below. The strong vertical shape references Japanese scrolls. And here's a detail. This is called Be Quiet, or Fique Quieto. So in 1942, Brazil declared war on Japan. Japanese Brazilians faced curfews. They were restricted from travel and gathering and could not speak the Japanese language in public. Those living on the coast were forcibly relocated with only 24 hours notice. Japanese schools and newspapers were shut down. Japanese Brazilians were arrested, tortured, jailed, and deported for no reason other than being Japanese. And so you can see this family, these parents are silenced and suppressed, and to protect their own children, they cover their mouths, contributing to the cycle of racism, oppression, and shame. This happened in Brazil, and it happened in the US. So after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, many Japanese Americans burned cultural materials, photos, documents, anything that tied them to Japan. Japanese American parents wanted their kids to speak English to blend in, and the kids were told they had to work twice as hard as their Caucasian classmates. The effects continued to affect the psyche of later generations. Cultural erasure, racism, and oppression has and continues to affect different groups around the world. These are a few digital sketches of my grandmother's siblings. These are the eldest siblings, Hisaburo, Sonosuke, Mosaburo, and Kinoue. And then these are the four younger siblings, Torataro, Fumie, Yoshio, and Shizuo. And so I started this project in 2019, and I'm a little behind. I haven't had time to focus on it, but my plan is to create painted portraits of each of the Takatsu siblings. So I'm going to show research materials for my portrait of Shizuo Takatsu. I gathered stories and photos from his relatives. This is a family photo of Shizuo, his wife Katsue, and their children Mamoru, Sunao, and Yayoi. Shizuo was a very quiet, private person, but I discovered he had an extraordinary life. This is Shizuo and Katsue's bicycle shop in São Paulo. And then Katsue taught sewing at a local girls' school. And then this is Katsue and Shizuo at home with their granddaughter, Fabiana, who's now 50, I think. So this is a portrait. So my great-uncle Shizuo Takatsu left Japan as a teenager, escaping the military draft, and he went to Brazil. He started work as a farm laborer, and he also drove a bus transporting people around the countryside. When people couldn't pay, he'd still give them a ride. The bold yellow where the bus overlaps Shizuo's face emphasizes racism against Nikkei, prevalent especially during World War II. Shizuo also ran a rice warehouse, and he had to fire an employee who later set his warehouse on fire, and Shizuo lost his business. He and his wife Katsue had 3 children and ran an ice cream shop and a bicycle shop in São Paulo. The blue striped awning represents their businesses and lives as entrepreneurs. Shizuo later injured one of his eyes, and his wife Katsue had to take on more work to support the family, so she worked as a sewing teacher for the girls' school. The red tiles in the background are rendered from the front yard at their São Paulo home, where they live with their second and third generations of their family. So through these portraits, I hope to honor these individuals and bring to life their untold stories. So I have a video clip that goes with this photo. This is Sunao, who is the son of Shizuo and Katsue, and then with his wife Odaisa, and then that's Fabiana, who is the baby with her grandparents that you saw earlier. And you can see the red tiles on the ground from Shizuo's portrait in the photo. Let's see. Oh, sorry. Trouble finding my... Oh, there. Where's my tech person? Sorry, I can't.
Just keeps disappearing here. Oh, wow.
No, she speaks a lot, so that's with her.
Achei muito interessante a sua viagem aqui no Brasil.
Thought it was very interesting your trip to Brazil.
Não podemos deixar a nossa história de família morrer,
We cannot let the story from our family to die.
porque quem não tem história não está vivo.
Who doesn't have stories and history is not alive.
E temos que passar isso para os nossos filhos, para
We need
netos
to
e
send
bisnetos.
to give that to
Obrigado
next
pela sua-
generations.
Yes.
So she wants to thank you for doing that project.
Okay.
Obrigada. Thank you. Okay. So I'll repeat again. I think it's up there. Odaisa was talking about legacy and preserving stories with Fabiana translating. She said, "We cannot let the stories of our family die. Those who don't have stories, history, are not alive. We need to give that to the next generation." So this is the next generation, both great-grandchildren of Shizuo and Katsue. Gustavo was assigned to make a poster of an important woman in history, and he memorialized his great-grandmother Katsue's story for his school project. And then on the right is Nicholas, or Nico, who at that time was 4.5 years old. He's been performing taiko professionally with his parents since he was 2 years old. So Ricardo outreached and coordinated this Takatsu International Zoom meeting in late May 2020. We had participants from Brazil, US, Spain, and Africa. And then this is Livia. At that time, she was 7. She spoke Portuguese at home and attended an immersion English and German school. And she also attended Japanese language school once a week. So in this video, you'll see her singing karaoke with her vovo, her grandfather, Georgie. The song is called Kitaguni no Haru, and it's about longing to go back to their hometown. Let's see if I can... Again. Oh, okay.
You hit the space bar.
Space, okay.
届いたお袋の小さな包みあのふるさとへ帰るかな帰ろうかな
It's so cute. I really love that moment of true joy and connection between the generations. So some discoveries. Because of this project, I now view my grandmother and great-grandmother in a whole new way. I have pride in knowing a little bit more about them. They were fierce and courageous to take a huge risk and immigrate to a new country. They also cultivated and maintained international family connections, and this is their gift and legacy of tying us together. I just wanted to share some images from a trip that I took with my mother last year. And this will relate to some of the complexity and legacy of the Nikkei incarceration. So I went with my mom to Minidoka last summer, and my cousin and his partner also joined us. And this was the first time for my mom to return to her birthplace. This is one of the guard towers at Minidoka. And they also have a barrack where several families would have lived, and a mess hall where incarcerees would line up to eat. The buildings were not insulated, and they had cracks in the walls where sand, wind, cold, and heat would come through. This is a map of the Minidoka site. So you can see some of the buildings, the river where kids would swim, and we wanted to see the site where our family barrack was located, block 38. But the land had been sold. So you can see the circle where the location of block 38 was. We could see it from a distance. Minidoka has a wonderful visitor center with a museum, videos, a gift shop, and it's open from Memorial Day to Labor Day. You can also schedule walking tours of the site or do a self-guided walking tour. And then this is my cousin Nicholas, his partner Denise, mom and me at Minidoka. So from these images, they also inspired more work. This is called Scream. And so you start at the top with Issei, first generation, then Nisei, second generation, Sansei, third generation, and Yonsei, fourth generation. The older generations are covering the mouths of their children. The effects of World War II continue to affect all generations. Many of the deeper stories of the incarceration experience have been lost with our elders. The pattern of silencing is finally broken with the younger generations who are speaking out against injustice. And then this piece, Susan brought the actual painting. Here, you can see this later. Well, it's easier to see if you want to see the actual painting. This is called Healing. So there's a woman on fire who's looking up at the brilliant firework in the sky. Barbed wire flows from the heart, releasing a brilliant shibori firework. Shibori is a Japanese textile technique, and the verb shiboru means to wring, squeeze, and press. Fabric is twisted and folded and stitched and dyed in this intricate technique, resulting in beautiful, unexpected patterns. I wanted to express that hope flows as we find a way to heal. I currently have a large mural piece called Song for Generations, which is on display at the Seattle Convention Center Summit Building downtown, which is the new building. This piece is approximately 8 feet wide by 16 feet tall, and this honors the Japanese American farmers of Bellevue. And then Susan also has a print, if you want to see the print. To study. The top panel of this piece references immigration, labor, and survival. The cranes fly over the rising sun and Pacific Ocean. Farmers clear the land to make fertile ground. The middle panel symbolizes the incarceration. Nikkei families lost their land and faced rampant racism fed by wartime hysteria. They packed what they could carry when they were unjustly removed from the West Coast. The blue star mother's flag signifies Nikkei who served in the U.S. military while their families were incarcerated. The burning house represents loss and trauma. The third panel represents the legacy of the incarceration. Barbed wire forms the U.S. flag and appears in the mouths of two Nikkei who speak out against past and present injustice. A young girl gives flight to a paper crane, which is a symbol of peace and hope. So if you'd like to see this piece, there's some limited tours that you can sign up for through the Seattle Convention Center's Summit Art Collection. It's a really amazing collection. There's 90 artworks in the building. And then I have a not very updated website, michellekumata.com, and I'm also on Instagram. So I think that's it. So thank you so much.
Do we have any questions for Michelle?
I just wanted to mention that some of us, three of us, were in a ukulele group with people from Minidoka.
Oh, really? In Seattle?
Wonderful, so we got to meet them.
Oh, yeah, there.
I just wanted to say it's not on. What was the question? I just wanted to say that Danny and Margaret and I were in a class or a group with some people from Minidoka.
Hold it to your mouth.
Okay. Can you hear it now? Yeah, I'll try again. I'm just trying to say that Margaret and Danny and I were in a group with some people from Minidoka. And then I think Margaret and I went on with those people for a long time and got to know them well and learned more about their history in Minidoka and their family histories. And one of them was is an artist and did a very nice book, which I try to find and show to you, about Minidoka.
What was their name?
Trying to remember the name. You've caught me off guard.
Oh, that's okay. If you think of it, let me know.
No.
Margie, do you have a question?
Yes.
There's the
Michelle, how old were you when you sold your first painting?
When I sold, probably in my 50s. I don't know. I don't remember. I've been, when I left the museum in 2018, I really tried to dedicate myself to really focusing on fine art. But before that, I had done a lot of illustration work too through the Seattle Times and then doing contract pieces. I can't remember when I sold my first painting, but I started selling more recently.
Is it difficult to break in?
Yeah, it is, but I think Seattle is such a great supportive city for the arts. I think there are a lot of opportunities, like for instance, the collection at the Summit building. They didn't commission me, they bought this piece that was already created, but they did commission, I think, 13 artists to create artwork for the building. And then they purchased, there's a total of 90 works there. So I think there are a lot of opportunities, there's grants, and there's a lot of great art organizations in the city. But I also know there are a lot of people who, they have a side gig, to keep going, because it's kind of unpredictable.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Susan.
Do you have a current project?
I'm working on a couple of projects. One project is in Redwood City, and they wanted to honor the chrysanthemum growers. There are a lot of Japanese American chrysanthemum growers down in that area, and they kind of put Redwood City on the map. They actually would supply all the chrysanthemums for the All Saints Day in New Orleans. So we were going to do, I'm working with 2 other artists to create, like where they have like an outdoor plaza, to create a floor design and then fence design and a sculpture. Yeah. Hi, Susan.
Hi. I just wanted to make sure I've got it straight. You have a great-grandmother that came to Seattle and a grandmother that went to Brazil because she couldn't stay here.
It was my great-grandmother, Saki, that went to Brazil.
Oh, I got it backwards.
That's okay. And then her daughter, my grandmother, Kinue, came to Seattle.
So your grandmother that was here, did she stay connected?
Yes.
Yeah.
She was the one that brought all her children to Brazil so they could know their family and know have that connection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very unusual. Have you met anyone else that has that Brazilian?
We have some family here. Yeah, I wanted to introduce, Edson Mori, who's from Brazil, but he and his wife Lisa and their son Nicholas. Nicholas is living in LA, and then Edson and Lisa are living in the Potomac, Maryland. So they're in the DC area. And then, and also not born in Brazil, but my dad is in the back, hiding in the back row. He was that little kid at Minidoka that you saw. Yeah, so I have, and Kasumi Yamashita and her mom Kazuyo, Yamashita, and Kasumi's father lived in Brazil for a while also, and then so did Kasumi, right? So there's people that have those connections. It sounds a little more unusual, but the more I start talking to people, the more Japanese Brazilians I've been finding.
What was the initial reason for Japanese families to move to Brazil?
So the economy was not good in Japan, and so the government actually was encouraging people to leave because they didn't want their country to fall apart. So Brazil had a labor shortage because of the abolishment of slavery. And then the Europeans who had come to work in the farms and plantations, a lot of them had left, so there was another labor shortage, and so that's the reason.
Was there ever any return back to Japan?
Yeah, there's actually this phenomenon called dekasegi, and so those are Japanese Brazilians who go to work in Japan. And they'll go there and make money and then come back to Brazil. And that's like a whole other story that I haven't really dived into, but a lot of my relatives have gone to Japan to work from Brazil too, also.
I have a story to tell you. I don't want to have it too long, but when I was very young, I was 5 years old, and I went with my father, who did a lot of traveling. We were in southern Montana, Wyoming, and one day as we were driving along, we encountered one of the big concentration camps. And my father said, "We're going to stop," which we did. And he started talking to a couple people there, and they, it was, they carried it on. And he signaled for me to come out. And so I came out and went into the camp and started playing with the kids. And we just had a great time. And it was so fun. And all I knew was, you know, the war had started, and they were the ones that did it, and yet they were so nice and friendly, and it was just great. I just wanted you to know that I thought so at that time.
So they let you into the camp too. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean,
I have a question. I was wondering if it was an economic reason that your family left Japan to come to the United States. Economic. So.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. They were looking for work or a way to make a living. That's why a lot of people left Japan. And the U.S., because of the Immigration Act law, that closed off the U.S. to the Japanese people, and so Brazil was open and accepting immigrants. So that's why they ended up going there. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much, and really thank you, Michelle. This was so incredible. Thank you so much.